Welcome viewers. On behalf of Iravati Research and Communication, this is Pratim Ranjan Bose. I have with me Professor Selim Raihan, a noted economist from Bangladesh. Welcome, Dr. Raihan.
Thanks.
Dr. Raihan is a professor at the Department of Economics, University of Dhaka, and Executive Director at the South Asian Network of Economic Modeling, or SANEM. We know each other for some time. What I appreciate about him is he doesn't believe in watertight compartments between economics and political economics. Numbers, I do believe, always doesn't tell the truth, particularly about the emerging economies. If I'm not wrong, Professor Raihan wrote in a recent newspaper article that in real life, it is political economics that takes precedence over economics. As a practitioner or as a student of business and economics in real life perspective, I find that appealing. With him around, we will discuss about Bangladesh and India-Bangladesh issues in this edition. On the agenda are current economic status of Bangladesh, the reform opportunities, and his assessments about the prospects of India-Bangladesh Comprehensive Economic Agreement, or CEPA. Dr. Raihan, from whatever you said, it's to me, it seems that Bangladesh is trying to live in a closed economy and wanted to enjoy every benefit of an open economy. And at the same time, it is taking a closed economy approach because that makes calculations very easy. And in some cases, for example, you mentioned about low taxation. Now, low fuel price is linked to that because globally, fuel is an important area for tax collection for the governments. So when, is not keeping in tune with the market and going back to some kind of very wrong economics where oil prices are not changing despite the global movement. Does that, so what is your, you actually prescribe? So if you can just quickly summarize the way, the things you want it to be changed. And again, to add on the 9.6, the banking interest rate. Now, when you are saying your inflation is rising, right? So I was thinking that, every country is actually squeezing the money flow. That is the only way you do it. So if Bangladesh keeps that tap open while pushing all costs up, it might lead to some other problem. Over to you, sir.
No, of course. I think I would little bit disagree with you that the country is closed. Country is actually open, especially countries'
No, I
integration with
didn't
the
say it is
global
closed,
economy.
but I'm saying it is trying to reap the harvest of closed economy.
Actually, the country has been open. Has moved from a kind of closed economy in the 70s and 80s. We know that, and started liberalizing it, and it actually
It
got into
opened, it opened
herself.
officially, it opened before India.
Yes, yes, of course. Kind of, if you look at the reform measures in the early 90s, and some of the reforms were actually taking place in the 80s too. Very slow reforms and very silent reforms, especially through the structure adjustment programs. In the trade policies and industrial policies, and actually our emergence of the ready-made garment sector took place since mid 80s or early 80s. But what I'm trying to say that the Bangladesh got integrated with the global value chain, and especially with the ready-made garments. And you know that Bangladesh is the second largest exporter in the ready-made garments, and
Right,
it has done really well.
right.
And also its integration with global economies also through remittances, we can see, but not to the extent what we expect that the country's integration, especially when it comes to diversifying its export basket and getting more products in the export basket to export to many other destinations. So
Right.
definitely the country still isn't there. Uh, I would say when it comes to reform, Bangladesh actually did some very good reforms, what we call them the first generation reform in the 80s and 90s, especially in the areas of trade policies, in the area of taxation policy. In the early 90s, we had the VAT reform, very substantial reform. and also reform in export policy to promote, especially, and ready-made garments was the major beneficiary of that reform, the export policy, and some industrial policy too. What really seriously lacked and was lacking was there is the fact that we have not been able to attract large-scale foreign direct investment uh,
Absolutely.
in the country. So
That
we,
perhaps indicates the low confidence of the world in Bangladeshi economy, which is not a good sign.
yeah, it's actually a complex issue. I would say FDI. We have one of the most liberal FDI policies, I would say. But when it comes to translating the FDI policy on your paper to actual reality, then you need to take into account a lot of bureaucratic complexity. You need to address many cost of doing business issues. You need to address some of the hardcore political economy issues too. Definitely, the country is lagging there, or has been lagging there, and and let alone some of the very important issues of the infrastructure issue. Because if you really want to have the foreign investors, a significant number of foreign investors to invest in your country, you need to address those areas as well. Another point is that that Bangladesh is a land scarce country. We have a very small piece of land with a population of huge number of population, more than 160 million people living in a very small piece of land. And when it comes to the choice between agricultural land and industrial land, we struggle because it is the same piece of land, whether you would use the land for food security or you use the land for industrialization. I think this is a very difficult choice for the policymakers. But so that is one of the reasons why when the foreign investors they wanted to invest in the country, they also found it very difficult to find suitable amount of land which could be offered to them for investment.
Just
To
interrupting
address the
you,
problem,
if I can
yes,
interrupt you,
yes,
the government announced setting up of many SEZs, which was a
yeah.
fantastic idea. What happened to that? I don't get to hear much about it.
Yeah. I was actually coming to that point. So to address the land issue, government has a very, I would say, very good initiative to establish 100 special economic zones by 2030. But I must say that it's very ambitious, especially to have 100 economic zones by 2030. But at least if few of them can be materialized, then definitely it would be a game changer for Bangladesh. Some of them, very few of them are already in operation. They have started attracting some FDI, but not until now, not in very large scale. But still, I would say encouraging. But we need to see some very rapid increase in, or rapid, I would say, realization or materialization of those special economic zones, which are not really taking place at this moment. Still, some slow progress. And we have been complaining about that. We need some faster implementation of the special economic zones. I must remind you that India has been offered to establish, I think,
Three,
special
three
economic, two or
probably,
three,
two or three.
yeah, special economic zones. But I'm not really convinced about the progress of those economic zones. To what extent the implementation has been, be a reality at this moment. So yes, the idea is there, and some of the programs are there. And also, government has taken initiatives to reduce the business cost by establishing some one-stop services and to address some of the very important issues related to cost of doing business. Uh, so, but we all know that probably this may take time. It is not something you can do overnight. And the foreign investor, any foreign investor, they will look at what is happening inside the country, existing foreign investors, what they are doing, their perception, and also at the same time the domestic investors are they investing, quite significantly. So I think all these things need to be addressed. But I would say that there are some important developments which have taken place, especially with the construction of the Padma Bridge on river Padma, which is actually open up the gateway to link the southern Bangladesh with the main economic, main economic corridor or lifeline, I would say, in Bangladesh, the Dhaka Chattogram uh, economic corridor. And then it has opened up the possibility of establishing, many industries or, have inviting many investment, both domestic and foreign, in the southern part. And it can
Corridor
also be
based
linked to
development.
yes, exactly. So it can be linked to the Mongla seaport as well as the Paira seaport. Mongla is the older one, which is being rebuilt or developed further, and Paira is a new seaport which is being developed. So I can see there are a lot of initiatives there, especially with respect to development of infrastructure, because it's not only the physical infrastructure, all these roads, highways, bridges have been developed, but at the same time, if you compare Bangladesh, 10 years back, the state where the country was, with respect to the generation of electricity, the country has been able to actually increase quite substantially its capacity of generating this. And now at this moment, we are witnessing power cut some hours in a day because of the supply of fuel and the price it has gone up quite significantly. We know that. But again, what I would say that there are some attempts to develop the infrastructure, to develop electricity generation. But what really still lacks is the whole integration of all these initiatives into and building the right kind of image so that the foreign investors are probably that's the point you made at the beginning, that whether they feel the kind of confident that yes, the country is ready to accept large scale foreign investment. Let's go to Bangladesh, let's invest there. I think we
Right.
need to actually cross that last mile or a few last miles to achieve that point or achieve that state.
In fact, when you said about, say, electricity, I was looking at the data 20, I think it was 2020 or 2021 data from Bangladesh only. That 85% of the electricity is generated on either gas or liquid fuel, right? Now, in the 10 years of all this, 10 years is not a small time, because in 10 years, in the between, say, 2008 and 9 to 7 8 to 2017, if you see, the India's total power capacity doubled, and we added huge coal-based power stations. Now we know, it was understood that coal is a basic base energy, most stable base energy. But still, when you see the 85% dependence on these fuels, which Europe is now moving back to, then of course, I think I should say, as you rightly said, that things are not very unidirectional types. I mean, even if you do certain things and you do develop an ecosystem, even in a smaller segment, then it helps. But probably you have done too many things in too many areas, and they are not adding up uh, somewhere.
One particular area is, of course, this electricity. Yes, you are right. But at this, uh, there was an issue of building or diversifying your energy sources for producing electricity. Coal-based, there are some coal-based power plants, especially the Rampal, which is power plant, which is in collaboration with India, Matarbari, which is in collaboration with Japan. Rampal probably it will be operational within a month or two, and Matarbari probably it will also be operational in a few months from now. So some coal-based power plants will actually start supplying to the national grid. But also, you probably know that with the Russian cooperation, we are having this nuclear-based power plant. Uh, what we are seeing that probably it will take some time to actually move from the very gas-based or liquid fuel-based, electricity generation to more diversified sources of, electricity generation. At the same time, I think the whole issue of renewable energy needs to be
Yeah.
highlighted quite significantly. The government has this on the paper. The policy is very much on the paper, but when it comes to implementing it, I think still a long way to go. The whole issue was that I think until recently, when we saw that the gas prices in the international market, especially the liquid gas, it went up like anything, the prices. Probably there was a kind of comfort zone which was created that still the country can continue with the kind of liquid fuel or liquid gas, gas-based power plant. But now I think with this kind of very short-term powerful shock, I have heard the policymakers that is actually shaken their mindset that the need for diversification of the energy sources is a must now. So I think probably that we'll see in the coming days we have a power master plan actually on the energy sector master plan, which talks about all this kind of diversification. But when it comes to implementation, I think definitely the challenges are there. But definitely, I would say I fully agree that unless we diversify our energy sources for generating electricity and moving towards more, I would say, robust or sustainable sources. Again, coal is not a sustainable source when it comes to environment. But you are right that even Germany, who were the pioneer of the renewable energy, and then in Europe, and then all kinds of moving from coal-based power plants, they are now coming back to coal-based power plants because of the crisis, of gas
The
supply.
simple economics is gas, if priced above 3.5 million metric British thermal unit, is not viable energy source for electricity. And
Right,
we have left that price some 15 years ago. So,
right,
in India, we have some 7,000 megawatt of gas-based capacity. They are living idle. They as a spinning capacity. So, if you are in emergency requirement, then they can be opened. But it is unviable electricity. We have got that. I'll briefly touch upon. I didn't want to raise that in this discussion because that is a cliched subject otherwise. Bangladesh witnessed probably the biggest boost to infrastructure creation in its history, and it is really big, right? The spends are also really high. I mean, when I compare with the GDP, such kind of infrastructure creation should have. I'm not taking any names, but there are, my point is very simple. Do you see that kind of growth multiplier coming? Ideally, infrastructure we know has a growth multiplier. Seven multiple of seven, we say. But if the spend is too high, then obviously your payback is increasing, and you start, there is a problem in that area. And also I see certain things which, for example, if you today build a huge gas power plant, spending billions of dollars, that will be a useless project in financial terms. So this kind of things, what, are you happy with the multi, or with the, what is your expectation of the multiplier?
No, no, I think this is a very important question, especially if we look at the electricity generation, the last 10 years. We have some critical observation on that. Definitely, the way government relied on what we called, this very small uh, diesel-based or fossil fuel-based power plant units, where and government was paying high prices and providing subsidies to the
There is a
we call
name
it
to
rental
that,
power
na?
plant,
Rental,
for
quick
example,
rental,
power plant,
right?
quick rental power plants. So we can be critical to that, and definitely there are some critical observations too. And I myself also was critical on some occasions. But one issue is that despite all these critical observations or criticisms, the generation of electricity itself was helpful, to maintain the kind of economic growth or export
100%.
performance over the last 1 decade or so. So if the counterfactual is that if you don't have that kind of electricity, I would say that Bangladesh would not have been in position to generate that kind of economic growth or reduction in
Definitely.
poverty
Energy
or
is critical.
export performance. Of course. So I think definitely there were some multiplier effects too. Probably the multiplier effects could have been larger if the electricity generation were in a different way, in a more robust way. But it did not take place because we need to understand the whole political economy behind it. That this is the government, it's the country's own government. They do it. We can't actually, uh, you know, uh, for
That's a
example,
reality.
certain
That's a
projects.
reality.
That's the reality. Certain projects probably we are always critical that this project could have been done in a with a smaller amount of budget. But these projects are actually implemented by the country's own elites. It's not that you can't actually get other people from outside; they will be
Enough.
doing it for
Fair
the
enough.
country.
Fair enough.
So you'll have some margins there. These are being kind of taken by the elites, either political elites or business elites. So the issue is that in some critical areas where those infrastructural developments, so definitely they actually helped the country's growth and development. But there are some critical issues too, especially this is the point which we have been raising that in some of the critical infrastructural development, where we are witnessing some very large extension of time or with respect to implementation or delay in implementation, and also very significant escalation of cost. Then when you initially estimated the cost benefit ratio and the kind of project's benefit, with the escalation of this huge escalation of the cost and time, I'm quite sure that you need to revise that cost benefit estimates, and some of the multiplier effect gets reduced. So that is one thing. But some of the recent developments, especially I mentioned about the Padma Bridge, I would say that this will be extremely instrumental. I myself actually pioneered a study back in 2010 for World Bank and Bangladesh Bridge Authority. And I tried to do some ex-ante model to estimate the economic impact of Padma Bridge if that takes place. And now it's a reality. And my own estimation with different models came that it could add to GDP annually by more than 1 percentage point. So and also it will help reducing poverty. So that is one kind of ideas and that's a kind of
Padma
understanding
Bridge will
multiplier effect.
surely have. It was a long requirement. It was dividing
Exactly.
the country. The country was divided. So Padma Bridge will have. I mean, whatever argument be there on the cost side, but Padma Bridge will have an impact on the economy. I mean, I have also no doubt about it.
Exactly.
You
But
can
there are some
see.
other side of the story too. Other side of the story is that actually that's what I have written in my several research papers, and that's what I call the political economy of infrastructural development. The idea is that you see the policymakers in countries like us, they're extremely interested in building big infrastructure. So but when it comes to solving some small infrastructural problems, you don't see that kind of interest. The point I'm saying that if I give you one example, that you may build a big road, a big highways, but you are not developing the connecting roads
Connecting
to get
roads.
onto the highway, or the small roads where the people or other vehicles will be able to get onto the highway. Then this highway will remain unutilized or
100%.
underutilized.
100%.
So that is the point. That is the point. What I'm saying that we have seen some very significant improvement in construction of highways or building bridges. But when it comes to solving some last mile infrastructure
Connectivity
problems
issue.
for some sectors, like some not ready-made garments, for leather, for other sectors, those who have potentials, we have not seen that kind of interest. I want to give you the very specific example of the leather sector. Leather sector in 2017 was mentioned as a export product of that year, and so that year was mentioned as the leather year. That means to promote leather export. And in that year, we actually witnessed a drop in export of that sector.
Oh,
And it was mentioned that the country has the potential of actually doubling or tripling the export of leather in few years. But we didn't witness that because the leather sector has so many small infrastructural problems or sector specific problems. These problems are not being solved. So my point is that even if you build Padma Bridge, even if you develop your port, Chittagong port, make it extremely efficient, leather sector, unless they solve their problems, they will be able to enjoy the benefit of this infrastructure, development. So you need to keep a balance between the development of the broad infrastructure, at the same time solving some of the small infrastructure problems for some critical economic sectors, so that they also get the benefit out of it. So here is the kind of dilemma where probably I wrote in my paper that why policymakers are not that interested in solving those
probably you
on the
have a
side.
you yourself gave the answer when you said that it is completely dominated by one sector. So if one
Exactly. So that
sector
is
has
one thing.
disproportionate presence in the economy and the policy making, I think 85% of your lawmakers are from business, and I assume that majority of them are from one industry. So obviously
Yeah, so
we
that
are.
is that voice muscle is very much there of the dominant industry. At the same time, you would not see that, and the other side is that the other sectors they have very low voice. They don't have very organized voice, and you are right that they don't have that kind of presence even in the policymakers, among the lawmakers. And that is one side. The other side of the story is that probably you don't find very attractive business projects related to those infrastructural development where the elites would be interested, to get engaged itself. So I think these are the kind of very interesting political dynamics where we are still, I think I would say, lagging behind in terms of diversifying export basket, getting many of the sectors on board to enjoy the benefits of the infrastructural development and also to get those reflected in our overall development process. I think these things need to be addressed. So coming to that point, we had this kind of first generation reform, which were quite useful and successful. And I wrote in my different writings that the dividends from those first generation reform probably are very much towards the end. So we need to undertake some very important second generation reform, and policymakers they need to take these things very seriously when it comes to reforms in the taxation, when it comes to reform the export policy, trade policy, banking sector, exchange rate, and all these areas. Over to you.
Sir, let's go to India, Bangladesh, and regional cooperation part. Now, the regional value chain, I've been I'm very every person has his obsession, so I have my obsession in regional value chain, and I always try to look at it. I see developments in terms of business to business. There has been increase in FDI or activities, but pretty slow. In it, we could have seen 10 years is too long time, and in these 10 years, this side also, rather India had a little more promising story this time. So there should have been a little more growth. Secondly, is the official side, where we have seen obviously the trade increased many times from in last 10 years, and the cooperation between the two countries has been, I mean, historically, let us be realistic. So it has increased phenomenally. Now, to me, the COVID years actually, beyond the scope of these dry numbers, which doesn't really make much of the COVID years presented a very interesting story of the importance of regional trade when the supply chain was disrupted, and I think $500 per box sea freight became 14,000 rupees, and there were no boxes. Ships were not calling. So then goods were rolling in and rolling out between these two countries by trucks and barges. That sort of, I mean, to me, it has been extremely encouraging. How do you find the scope of better economic activity, more comprehensive? Now we know so far in the discussion, we know the weaknesses. Bangladesh couldn't develop its sectors other than ready-made garments. It is yet to create the financial and policy ecosystem, financial policy, infrastructural ecosystem for other sectors, important sectors. Service is a very crucial sector for us. So in the coming discussion with CEPA, what is your take on the discussion on CEPA, the comprehensive policy, which I personally think is, you have to take the plunge. You just cannot avoid it for too long. And what are the things that Bangladesh should do, both at home, what probably that you have already touched up, and at the discussion table, what is your expectation? What you would have done if you were on the discussion table?
Yes, I'm actually in the discussion. The reason is that the joint feasibility study. I was the team leader from Bangladesh. So between the joint feasibility study which has taken place on CEPA, this comprehensive economic partnership agreement. You know that in 2018 and 29, actually in 2019, the idea was discussed between these two countries at the very high level, and then the actual feasibility study actually started in 2020. And then with several rounds of discussions between two institutes in Bangladesh, one in Bangladesh and India, one in Bangladesh, the Bangladesh Foreign Trade Institute. Actually, I was leading from that institute, and from India, the Center for Regional Trade. So these two institutes produced a joint feasibility study, and we had several rounds of discussions in the country with important stakeholders, and also in India with CRT to try to come up with a single document since it's a joint study. So now in the SEPA, there are three major pillars. One is this, free trade in goods, then trade in services and investment. So these are the three pillars based on which we call it a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. Uh, Coming to Bangladesh's position, I would say that if we compare Bangladesh now and take consider 10 years back, the state the country was, I can see a kind of some very important changes in mindset among the policymakers. Especially, there is a keen interest on having SEPA-like or agreement with different countries, and also FTAs with different countries. I must note that Bangladesh has not signed any bilateral FTA with any country yet. So that means that country still lacks the kind of experience in engaging with any other country, kind of heavily with respect to trade agreements. Bangladesh is a partner, is a member of SAFTA. We know that in the South Asian Free Trade Area, but we also know that SAFTA has not been that successful or operationalized. It is stuck there somewhere, and for various political reasons in this region. So when this point or when the proposal of SEPA actually came, uh, definitely there were some resistance or there were some hesitance to it, in Bangladesh among the policymakers and different stakeholders too. But what I can see that there is a kind of convergence of ideas or opinions that the SEPA would not be bad for the country if that is negotiated in a right way for the country. So uh, when it comes to SEPA, as we are talking about the free trade in goods, Bangladesh is already enjoying a duty-free market access in India. The issue would be under SEPA, Bangladesh will have to give duty-free market access to India with on several products. Probably Bangladesh can definitely negotiate for keeping certain products outside of FTA. That always happens in all kinds of FTAs. But we have to open up the goods sector for Indian imports compared to what we are now. Also in services, there are certain sectors where we need to open up, and probably there are certain sectors where Bangladesh also has opportunities to export to India. In the area of investment, uh, I think the whole idea is to attract large-scale Indian investment in the country. So you see that probably on trading goods and services, Bangladesh is going to face probably enhanced challenges because the country will have to open up. But the idea is that if you could attract large scale FDI, that can actually compensate or that can actually provide much favorable environment to compensate some of the challenges or losses what you can witness
You
in
have to
free
convert
trade in
that
goods
into
and services.
manufacturing growth.
Exactly. So exactly. So Indian investors coming here in the economic zones, they are producing manufactured products. They are even probably export back to India or other countries. That will actually help quite a lot. And that will also help in the balance of payment as well, overall balance of payment. Because we run a large trade deficit with India, bilateral trade deficit. So probably FDI can actually compensate that bilateral trade deficit, in the balance of payment uh, account. So I think this is kind of the context where the country is thinking. If I try to really read the minds of the policymakers, that they are keen to have a SEPA with India, They know that after 2026, say after the LDC graduation, India will no longer be providing the duty-free market access to Bangladesh. So to keep that market access, definitely you need to go for an FTA. And with the experience of global experience that mere FTA doesn't work if you don't include investment or some areas of services to it. So you can actually can enjoy larger gains, I would say.
And also,
So
if
I
I
think
may add that
yes,
the last 2 years or 3 years, the geopolitics, the changing contours of geopolitics that we are seeing, and the overall change in the global order, and whatever, the uh, the trade agreements have become increasingly important. I mean, you have to be part of something, otherwise things
of course.
might get
Bangladesh's major trade competitors, actually global competitors, there are in different trade agreements. If you consider Vietnam, Vietnam is part of ASEAN, Vietnam is part of RCEP, Vietnam is having bilateral FTA with the European Union, having bilateral FTA with the US. So I think, Bangladesh is, the policymakers, they're very much aware of it, that the major competitors in the global market, they are engaged in very important trade agreements. And if you don't participate, that means you will be left out and you'll be excluded from those benefits. That understanding is very much there. But I must also add one or two points is that Bangladesh over the last 3 years, Bangladesh has been able to increase its export to India. The very latest figure is around $2 billion of
right,
export, which
right.
was less than $1 billion if you take 3 years, go beyond 3 years. So that means that definitely there has been a success in rising export to Indian market. But still, ready-made garments occupy probably more than 50% of it, or around 60% of the export. That means we need to diversify our export basket. And also, I think other side is that still you haven't been able to attract large-scale foreign direct investment from India. So in the SEPA negotiations, these issues will emerge, I think, quite strongly. And how Bangladesh can use this SEPA once it's negotiated well and signed for its future development process. That will be a very, very important issue. I must say that irrespective of who are in power in Bangladesh, the political government, when it comes to trade with India, I think we always had a good, relation, especially uh, Bangladesh in fact, import from India, raw materials, especially raw materials and other capital machineries, in its export sector and its investigation process. So that means even if Bangladesh has a large trade deficit, bilateral trade deficit with India, Bangladesh you could use that trade deficit to convert into trade surplus with while it comes to trade with the US and European Union. That is one thing. And second thing is that the
I mean,
whole
it is normal that India will have a trade deficit, huge trade deficit with Saudi Arabia or Iraq, because we have to import oil from them. So the
exactly. So we should
trade
not be that
deficit
concerned
cannot
about bilateral trade deficit.
dictate the
Yeah,
cannot should not cloud. It is an important area, but it must not cloud our arguments.
it's not the bilateral trade deficit which we should be that concerned about. We probably will definitely be concerned about should be concerned about the overall trade deficit. But the bilateral, if as long as you can compensate by having trade surplus in other countries. But another point is that if you look at the composition of import from India, into Bangladesh, the last 3 decades, there has been significant change in the composition too. Earlier, it was mostly the
Exactly.
basic items, food items. Now it is mostly the raw materials or capital machineries, which has
Right,
actually
right.
very.
Major
I think
change
that is
in
also
the
that means
major. In
exactly
in
that means
fact,
Bangladesh is integrating in the regional value chain, but
right,
mostly with Indian market, yes, of course.
right, and energy now is a big component in the
Of course,
regional trade. Even with
Bangladesh is important for
Nepal,
India.
it is a very big component now. So that way,
Yeah,
regional trade has changed a lot in 10 years. But of course, we have to change way faster. And that
we
is
have to change
probably
way faster. We have to, when it comes to, because I can see that the Bangladesh India, the cooperation, economic cooperation, it is a kind of example in this region that how if two countries are interested, and they can actually go a long way. And that has been proven over the last 10 years that these two countries They have gone into transport connectivity. They have gone into energy connectivity, trade, and and of course the potentials for investment in various fronts. These two countries are actually collaborating. So I think, but still, I think when we compare these achievements with the potentials, we are still a lot of potentials need to be realized. Especially to address, I think the investment issue, especially to address some of the non-tariff issues, while that some of the Bangladeshis they still have the issues when it comes to exporting to India. But non-tariff, there are two sides. One is that you also need to enhance your capacity to meet the requirements in the export destination market. That means the Bangladeshi exporters they have to develop their capacity. But on the other side also, the Indian side also, Indian market, Indian policymakers, they also need to be careful to not to impose unnecessary restrictions.
So thank you so much, Professor. Thanks for you gave a lot of time, and it has been always nice to talk to you. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Most welcome.